reactions are trailing the 2020 budget presented to the National Assembly by President Muhammadu Buhari. While some say that it's a perfect timing for the presentation, others feel the budget process should not be rushed into. An economist, Mr. Paul Alaje, joins me from Abuja studios. I want to thank you so much indeed for coming on State of the Nation at this time. Do you think that the budget is sustainable? Of course, looking at the assumptions. Real GDP growth of 2.93%, exchange rate 305 to the dollar.
Thank you so much for having me. I think that some of the assumptions are very correct, and I think some of the assumptions may need to be reconsidered. Government is targeting close to 3% GDP growth rate. I don't think, based on the assumption we have, I think there are some contradicting figures that may not make that growth rate happen. Recall that we had assumed 3% growth rate in 2019. As I speak with you today, we're approximately 2% GDP growth rate. Why? Because we had some contradicting figures. Some figures that will reduce growth were already stated in the budget. So what we have now is, unlike 2019, where we had $60 per barrel oil prices. Right now, government is proposing $57 per barrel, as agreed by National Assembly after MTEP was sent to them. And government is also saying that perhaps 2019 will produce less of oil, as other than 2.3 that was captured in 2019. What we have in 2020 is 2.18. The mathematics is this: if you multiply that by the number of days in a year, you see that in 2020, we will earn less from oil export. Why? Because price has reduced and output has also reduced. So government is saying most of our revenue will now come from non-oil sector, where we have more revenue. We tried this same approach in 2016. Unfortunately, it failed, it did not work, and Nigeria ended up in recession. So as much as we want to have new drives, I think what is different between now and what was done in 2016 is strategy behind that. Remember that 2016 was the first budget presented by President Buhari on his election. This is another first election. There's another first budget that's going to be that has been presented by President Buhari after his re-election. We are going back to what we have attempted before. What we see in this new budget is that VAT, in which federal government will only get 15%, will slightly increase. And government is also looking at dynamic way of generating more from non-oil revenue, which will come from CIT, company income tax, and some other form of taxation, so that government can achieve a lump sum 3 trillion naira from that. Of course, I have my doubt. Because it didn't happen in 2014, it didn't happen in 2015, it didn't happen in 2017. I still don't know the miracle that will make it happen in 2020.
Okay, now that you've talked about the VAT, the value-added tax, that this budget is presenting to us, moving it up from 5% to 7.5%, the impact, so many economists like you believe that we'll begin to see some semblance of the government's preparedness to use VAT as a means to, get the kind of funding to fund the budget, especially the deficit. Do you see us surviving this?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you that in 2019, when we did 5% for VAT, it was only responsible for 3.3% of the entire budget, revenue coming from government, 3.3. So let's do the math. If we increase it by 50%, what you do in math is also to increase VAT by 50%. So what is 50% of 3.3? It's not even up to 5% of the entire revenue of government. How on earth will that be responsible for financing budget? More so that we want to generate unprecedented 8 trillion naira plus in revenue. So VAT will not be the argument for generating more. I think what government perhaps is saying, which of course we are yet to see the full document, is that government is trying to expand the tax bracket or tax net to bring more organization into paying of taxes so that we can have more money coming from non-oil sector. I think that perhaps would be a better argument. You could see new target given to custom and other government revenue generating agencies of government and new energy in that direction. If that is what government is saying, then it will make a lot of sense. But to think that VAT that gave only 3%, suddenly we give 90%. That will never work anywhere.
So where then do you expect that the government, looking at solutions now, maybe they can tinker with this a little, and then perhaps the National Assembly will begin to see reasons to look at it also? As Senator Baribe said, that this is not a sustainable budget. But if we look at the debt servicing of 2.8 trillion, and also look at how that is expected to be funded. If we're taking the variables of taxation, we're taking the variables of oil sector funding, and if we move out of that and look at also the 7.5%, which is being proposed at the moment, can we get enough to look at other sectors that will fuel this economy? For instance, look at education, look at healthcare. Doing the maths, you would have come down to about 500 naira from the allocations that's been proposed, 500 naira for each Nigerian, looking at the figure of 200 million population. How much education or healthcare can you get from 500 naira for each Nigerian?
Let me start with this, your introduction, particularly regarding this question. And what I'm about to say is that every single kobo we generate from oil in 2020 in Wholesome will be used to service debt. The figures are there. Why we'll be generating a bit above 2 trillion naira in oil based on the estimation presented. We'll also be using almost 2.5 trillion naira to service debt. What it means that our oil revenue, the big thing that Nigerians celebrate, perhaps will not go to tables of people, it will just be used to service debt. And that is not it. We are also going to borrow new debt. Where will the money come from? That perhaps is where you see that more money will now go, so the government will now be expecting more revenue from more noise sector. Guess what we suffer? Definitely some things are very paramount and they are non-negotiable. We have to service our debt, very importantly. And mark you, this debt, I'm not saying it was acquired just by this government or past government or government before that. I'm talking of gross sum of debt that Nigeria has as a country. That on the side, we now ask a question, how do we finance health? How do we finance education? So we should not be surprised that we are importing approximately 1.5 trillion naira worth of education, people that want to school in UK, US, and some African countries and Asia, because they believe that the money we deploy on education, barely for less than 50 billion naira is what goes to capital expenditure on education. The remaining part will be going into the current expenditure of the total allocation to Ministry of Education. If you go to so many other ministries, some money will go to, of course, recurrent expenditure. And just to put it clearly, in 2019, we had 30% for capital expenditure, meaning approximately 70% went to recurrent expenditure. What will we have in 2020 if the budget is approved as it's proposed? 20% is what we now go into capital expenditure, while recurrent expenditure would increase, of course, which we call consumption economics. 80% will go to recurrent, while only 20% will remain in recurrent. So what is the solution here? What I think government should do is to adopt innovative fiscal approach. And what does that mean? I believe strongly that when money becomes small and small, government has several options. One of the options would be to tax the people to get more. But the more you tax, you cannot also be looking for increase in growth, because tax will contrast your growth. So if we say we want to tax more and get more in taxation, and from 2%, we're expecting approximately 3%, in 2020, you can mark my word, you cannot get that. More so that people that would have invested and some money that would have gone into consumption is what we now use part of it to pay taxes. It doesn't make economic sense that way. So what we'll be looking at is part of the things that we want to do in terms of road construction, in terms of housing projects. How do we innovate? How do we partner with private sector, those around the globe who wants to do business? What have attracted them to Nigeria Portfolio Investment, under which, of course, Monetary Policy Authority, for Monetary Policy Committee and Monetary Policy Authority, Central Bank, among other agencies of government, are championing? What method are they using? Can we tax those who are responsible for fiscal harm of the economy to adopt the same approach so that we begin to see that light trade that we're trying to build in Abuja may not come by debt, it may come by companies' investment. Housing, 20 million housing gap. Who are those companies? What are those companies? Or where will those companies come from outside Nigeria to help Nigeria invest in these regards?
I've gotten all of that, and I also hope that the National Assembly are listening to you now to, as you try to proffer solutions to some of the grey areas that we have in that budget. But I must sincerely thank you for talking to us. Mr. Paul Alaje, he is indeed an economist from our Abuja studios. Many thanks for talking to us on State of the Nation. And that's how it's been on the show today. Many thanks indeed for watching. I'm Gimba Umar. This is State of the Nation. Bye for now.